At this point, it's safe to say the Payday gang was infamous. Hoxton was back where he belonged, and the dentist seemed as good as his word. The Diamond would offer a new challenge and the potential for even greater reward. In today's episode, we see the crew begin to truly grow and form into the Payday gang we know today. And with these reinforced numbers, skills and backgrounds, the possibility of sweet revenge for Hoxton rears its ugly head again. This is the story of Payday. In the grand scheme of the timeline, the previous Payday 2 events we've discussed took place over the course of 1 year. Great progress, but closing in on the end of 2014, business with the dentist was scheduled to recommence. However, before the gang could head to the National Gallery and hunt down the dentist's second quarry, they received an emergency call from none other than Vlad. His brother-in-law had gotten himself into quite the predicament, and Vlad was calling in a personal favour. Wanting to remain in his good books, given his history of revenge and unpredictability, the gang reluctantly agreed to Vlad's emergency request, even if one of the largest heists of their lives was just days away. Time was therefore of the essence as they headed to the woods west of the capital, parachuting into the location Vlad had received the Mayday from. Here they found a wreckage of a civilian aircraft, next to a surprisingly unarmed but highly intoxicated pilot. Crazy clearly ran in the family, as we find out this man, Harudin, of Bosnian and Norwegian descent, was actually Vlad's brother-in-law. He'd been sent on a Colombian cocaine smuggling run for Vlad before this unfortunate, I'm sure alcohol unrelated, crash landing. The crew's primary objective was the exfiltration of Harudin, which was easier said than done when the guy couldn't stay on his feet longer than 10 seconds. More importantly for Vlad though, was the recovery of his shipment, paying more for its safe return than he did his own brother-in-law's. Given their fatigue after the pretty demanding coke romp in the capital forests, the possibility of bringing in a new crew member was brought up. Capitalising on this suggestion, Hoxton, as if just to irritate Houston, suggested that the nature of the next heist would require additional stealthing expertise. He just happened to know a guy, or a girl in this case. Clover, her first name being Rochelle, was an experienced criminal despite only being 27 when she joined the gang. Much of this experience was second-hand, coming as a student of one of the most prolific heisters in the UK, our very own Hoxton. You see, at a young age, she headed over to the Welsh port of Holyhead, intending to graft, steal and cheat in England after a juvenile arrest had halted her progress in Ireland. Her intentions were quickly derailed as she picked the wrong man to pull a con on. A technique like the pigeon drop wasn't going to work on Hoxton, although his sharp dress made him appear a good mark. Despite catching her red-handed, he liked her moxie and decided to take her under his wing, teaching all he could impart during a heisting spree that tracked the length of England. Taking after her mentor, she did eventually double-cross Hoxton once the opportunity arose, making off with a shipment of military order L95s. Seeing her drive off with the take, all Hoxton could think is how well he taught her, and for her part there was clearly still some sentiment there, hanging on to one of the assault rifles she'd stolen with Hox as a memento of their time together. Seeing as time heals all wounds, and knowing a crew might teach her a thing or two about loyalty, Hoxton used his contacts, still in the UK, to reach out and invite her into the gang, specifically for a job that catered to her burglary skills. Fiercely nationalistic, her pride in Irish culture comes across in her style of speech, weaponry of choice, and even her mask style. She also has multiple similarities to Hoxton in how she goes about her business and her attitude to heisting. The FBI files have her down as the first new crew member in the Payday expansion, meaning Wick's presence was still unknown to them at her time of arrival. So what was this job that required new blood? The crew were after the Diamond, but this tells us little. Why did the dentist want the Diamond, and what was its true value? All evidence suggests it was all about its financial worth. Of course, a diamond of its size and purity should fetch many millions of dollars, and the dentist himself mentions a buyer who he claims was a patient of his. However, Bane's gut told him otherwise. If the legends of the diamond were to be believed, it was no mere shiny stone, having many similarities to the cursed Hope Diamond. Also, the dentist was a man for whom we did the fetching, not someone who fetched for another. When Dallas met the dentist, they discussed how another criminal gang led by a man named Daxter attempted a hit on the museum a year before. I wonder if the dentist was sending the gang into another hornet's nest he'd poked at recently, just like in The Benevolent. Either way, after the successful return of Hoxton, the gang was locked into contract for 2 more heists, and like it or not, the diamond was one of them. The setting for this heist was the McKendrick Museum of Ancient Arts, sponsored by the very same mayor we helped into power. For a museum, it had become wildly popular and well guarded, in no small part due to the diamond exhibit, but also as a result of housing a set of paranormal artifacts that went beyond explanation. Surely these were fakes and forgeries set up by our dear mayor to drum up some extra interest in his museum. I certainly wouldn't put it past him. Either way, seeing how the attempted robbery of the year prior was so ruthlessly crushed by Gensec, all evidence suggested that this would be no walk in the park. Hoxton, Dallas, the new recruit Clover, and begrudgingly, Houston set about to infiltrate the museum. The building was well designed to make out-of-hours entrance difficult. So, to make their job slightly easier, the dentist sends the gang in during early morning hours, close to opening time where security would be changing shifts and at their drowsiest. He also offers a number of favours, as he did at the Benevolent. The 4 employed thermite to burn an entrance into the museum through the bars of its archive windows. From here they split up to rewire a set of 4 security boxes which controlled the power to alarm laser wires. In the process, finding and cable tying the museum staff who were holding the key cards required to break through a time lock into the exhibit. After waiting out this timer, they head straight into the main exhibit, which had one last measure of protection in place, a set of pressure plates linked to a randomised light box, with one wrong step meaning detection and the release of a potent tear gas. Memory puzzles were right up Clover's alley though, moving through the plates and taking the diamond from its pedestal without detection. The gang left the way they came, on foot to the escape van, Clover using her expertise in object exfiltration and pre-placed glass cutters to take some extra artifacts with her. And so the liberation of the diamond was complete, meaning according to Dallas's first meeting with the dentist, our final business would conclude with a trip to Vegas. However, this would take much more preparation than any of the gang's past heists, so as much as they may have wanted business with the shadowy dentist to conclude, it would have to wait. Fortunately, the Payday gang seldom went long without work, with a new job closer to home offering the potential of a lucrative contract. You see, up until recently the crew had been receiving all of their munitions from Gage, but he'd suddenly up and left the country, and even Bane didn't know exactly where he'd gone. So a new weapon supplier was immediately called for, especially to cope with the crew's expansion. For this, Bane contacted the Butcher. The name which the police associated with the alias was Denisa Horvat, although this may have been itself an alias, hinting at her Croatian birth. Of all the contractors, excluding the dentist, she may have been the most experienced in her field, coming from a family of smugglers who traditionally used their vocation of animal butchery to conceal and move illegal weaponry through national borders, also dabbling with drug and chemical imports around Europe. Her current operation had been in place for at least 49 years, and the name The Butcher was known to date back to the Cold War era. The Bosnian Civil War had left the Butcher as the final surviving member of her family and meant the trafficking business was hers and hers alone. Over the years since, she'd rebuilt and expanded the business, becoming a household name within the European criminal underworld. Bane's supply request gave her the opportunity she needed to extend her operations to the US, knowing she could leverage her assets to contract Bane's crew to do something for her. This something was warhead recovery. To get their hands on the Butcher's mark, a nuclear explosive being moved in parts via the Virginia docks and onto a train that would take it to Norfolk, the crew had to cover all eventualities. This meant heading to both the port location to attempt to secure the bomb on arrival and intercepting the cargo train moving it inland if the bomb had been moved before the first group could reach the docks. This meant an 8th crew member was required if they were going to attempt both hits simultaneously. Fortunately, the Butcher had considered this already. She knew a man, a Croat just like herself, who was tailor-made for the Payday gang. Dragan was his name. Back in Europe, he was a man who'd spent many comfortable years playing both sides as a rogue Interpol agent. Legally cracking skulls all whilst rubbing shoulders with some of the region's finest criminals, he operated on many different payrolls. Once the contact he was most loyal to, the Butcher, called for him to break his undercover status for the chance at a new, more esteemed role, he was happy to oblige, stabbing his partner in the back to get his agency off the Butcher's tail. His reward was a ticket to Washington, a new life, a new alias, and a new gang that shared his criminal ambitions, all as a part of Bane's deal with the Butcher, offering her a little leverage in proceedings and the gang more firepower and a clear indication of the Butcher's sincere intentions. Dragon ended up being one of the more violent members in the crew, but most frighteningly, he was also one of the most calculating. His profile with the FBI suggests he'd exert unnecessary force on captive civilians, and certainly was one of the most well-trained cop killers under the Payday umbrella, using his background in law enforcement to take advantage of poor police procedure. I suppose Bane couldn't really argue with results, and keeping the butcher sweet was far more important than worrying about morality. So, Dragon would become the necessary 8th member, joining the Forest Interception group consisting of the more gung-ho elements in the gang, namely Chains and Wolf. Over at the dockyard, those with a bit more guile snuck into the docks, using keycards to allow the Croat ship the Moretta entrance to the port mouth. They guided it to an accessible port location where it could be intercepted to search through its hull containers. Unfortunately, it seemed the bomb had already been moved inland by rail transit, meaning the 4 stationed outside the city limits, including Dragon, were given the signal to move. They derailed the train with a controlled explosion and used a water pressure detonation on the bomb vault to get access to the warhead itself, without blowing themselves up. This subsection of the gang was successful in hauling the bomb parts clear of the train and escaping the region via plane, much to the butcher's delight. Not only did she pay well, but there are some weapons that are easier to come by in Eastern Europe, so quickly the gang found themselves on the receiving end of multiple weapon shipments, including incendiaries. It really is no wonder the clowns were becoming even more feared amongst the ranks of US law enforcement. Soon after business with the butcher had concluded, a new prospective heister was knocking at Bane's door, this time entirely on their own accord. Jacket was an enigma. He'd been known to the Payday gang for some time now. I mean, who hadn't heard of Jacket? The sociopath had already allegedly wiped out the Russian mafia in Miami alone. Be they legend or hearsay, Jacket's escapades made some of Wick's achievements look like the work of a run-of-the-mill hitman. Only serving to expand on Jacket's legendary image and add to his mystique was his refusal to say a word. Instead, he used a 1980s dictaphone filled with splintered self-help tape recordings to get his point across. Unsettling, to say the least, but this meant the police had virtually nothing on him. Having moved to the DC area recently to specifically track down the commissar who had ties to the Miami Mafia, Wolf first met him when abducting the commissar's gang members for interrogation. Both exuded their own special kind of crazy, so there was clearly a mutual respect here, meaning they shared the task evenly without ever exchanging words. Jacket agreed to allow the gang to take his quarry on the understanding that he could take care of any further interrogations. A pretty reasonable guy. However, roughly a year later, after again hearing of the Payday gang's ever-increasing notoriety and their success with the commissar, Jacket was intent on meeting Wolf again, this time with a proposal. He tracked down and tortured an unknown number of police operatives until Bane could not help but notice his activity within the web of CrimeNet. Whilst Jacket made him uneasy and didn't seem to understand the true intentions of CrimeNet, Bane had to admit he was perfectly suited for their lifestyle. I mean, he already had his own mask and persona. And if the addition of Dragon was anything to go by, more muscle was necessary for the future. The police responding to the gang's updated arsenal by adding SWAT van turrets to their ranks. This in mind, Jacket was inducted into the gang with a degree of unease. But better the devil you know and all that. For those of you wondering, this is the very same Jacket of Hotline fame, but living in quite a different timeline, with Hotline Miami's events taking place closer to modern day, not in the 80s as it does in the game. Which is why Jacket appears to be a young man in Payday 2. Back with the main storyline, whilst awaiting news from the dentist people as the server recovered from the FBI officers was nearing full decryption, Bane was contacted by an anonymous third party to steal a set of new model Falcagini show vehicles. Hoxton was beginning to get twitchy regarding this rap, and desperate for revenge, set out to meet an old associate who claimed to have some information which would aid in the search. So, Hox sat this one out, leaving the remaining stealth experts to infiltrate the tour dealership, which showcased these expensive cars despite limited security. The gang entered through the roof, gaining access to the show floor car keys with the manager's keycard and showing just why open glass buildings are an easy take. Using a controlled C4 explosion on a nearby construction site to create a makeshift entrance to a tunnel which led directly to a nearby dock. Using the actual car keys so the supercars would remain untouched, the crew smashed through the front windows of the open-plan dealership and descend into the tunnels. The cars handled pretty poorly for six-figure supercars, but even so, the DC police force were entirely unprepared for vehicular pursuit, failing to respond before the cars were long gone. Another string to the Payday gang's bow. Meanwhile, Hoxton's meeting with his old friend Bonnie was quite a lucrative one for both parties. The big 6'3" Glaswegian knew Hoxton from when they both grafted in the UK. While she started off her career in crime as a bank robber up in Scotland, driven by the working class injustice inflicted over the Thatcher era, she'd learnt there are far easier ways to get rich and nicer places to do so. So much like Hox, she moved to the US to scale up operations during the late 90s, first being investigated for a series of honeymoon murders and insurance claims. Bonnie was eventually caught and convicted for the lesser crime she committed, avoiding a life sentence for multiple homicide thanks to limited evidence. Still, she faced a sizable stint in US prison. However, ever the opportunist, she fared well there, gathering information that would improve her prospects once she was back on the outside. While in prison, Bonnie, who didn't seem to bother with an alias as her surname was known to be McGee, learned of the Payday operation and heard along the prison grapevine that her old friend Hoxton was rumoured to be part of this gang. Seeing an opportunity within CrimeNet for herself and hearing Hoxton's name come up multiple times, she decided to use the last remaining months of her sentence to gather all the information she could on this rumoured rat who'd betrayed him, as a bargaining chip for entry into the Payday gang. Always a gambler, when the time came and Hox went to meet her, she staked her membership on this chance. On the condition that Hox vouched for her entrance into the crew, she revealed the nature of a supposed FBI safe house housing the rat, and told of her ex-cellmate, Juliana Morales. Now, where have I heard that surname before? Either way, Hoxton seemingly had the knack of getting his own way with Bane, convincing him that the 43-year-old still had a lot to offer the gang and would be necessary thanks to her intel on the safe house and its alarm system. Bane agreed just in time as the FBI safe house location had finally been traced, courtesy of the dentist. Finally, revenge was just on the horizon.